Hey friends, it's Melvin. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Here's just a few quick things I wanted to notify you guys about before we get started. First up, very soon, new episodes will be releasing Wednesday mornings rather than Tuesday. So don't panic if you don't see a new episode on Tuesday. Just wait a little longer and you'll see it in your feed. Second, we've introduced a mailbag. Check those show notes and toward the bottom you'll see a mailbag link. You'll then be able to text us any questions you might have about movies, the movie industry, or any movie/Christian related questions you might have. Then we'll respond in a future episode, so send us your questions now. Up next, Patreon polls, which are available to Patreon supporters at the $3 tier or higher, have been updated. Supporters can now suggest films or shows to be reviewed at the end of each month. The two most liked submissions will become the options for the Patreon poll, so if you want to hear us talk about your favorite movie or show, join our Patreon and start campaigning. And lastly, whether you're a new or longtime listener, please consider writing a review or rating the Cinematic Doctrine podcast on iTunes and Spotify. Apart from financially supporting on Patreon, these are the two most helpful ways to support the show. And that's it. Enjoy the episode. Hey, you just pressed play on this episode. We still have some Patreon stuff that we just talked about for about 17 minutes. It's just about Halloween, just about not sure where the origins of Halloween are, kind of the cultural difference of Halloween versus Valentine's or even Christmas, some other holidays that I would say that the Christian community is comfortable with versus Halloween where it's about death and scary things. And 'tis the season, am I right, folks? So we talked about that for about 17 minutes. Pretty enjoyable. If you support on Patreon, $3 a month, you get access to extra content every episode. Not every episode, most episodes. I'd say 98% of our episodes. And it's usually in the beginning of the episode, so you can just press play and move on with your life. There is other stuff you get by supporting on Patreon, $3 a month, but you're going to hear about that as you're listening to the episode. So I do not need to spend time laboring on for 2 minutes about how you should support on Patreon. You'll be able to hear all about that there. But so in this episode, Dan and I a couple weeks ago just 2 weeks ago, because Hangman's Curse was just a two-parter in 1 week. A couple weeks ago we watched Halloween Ends, and the two of us were like, that was weird. Just kind of a weird movie. And I'm pretty sure, especially on my end, I don't know about Dan's end, but on my end, I was like, I don't know, there's a lot of things I liked, and I could be convinced to like it, but the movie's a little strange and just weird, and just didn't hit the way I was expecting it to, so it kind of just left feeling bonkers, as is the title of the episode. And then, I don't know, you kind of just sit on a movie, and sometimes your thoughts might change or develop. And when we're doing a podcast where the weekend something comes out, and then that weekend you want to have an episode up very quickly, and our releases are always on Tuesday. We usually record on the Monday before the Tuesday. I don't know, you don't really get to sit on stuff and think about it. And so when I was thinking of this as a Let's Talk discussion, it was the concept of changing opinions and developing thoughts, and how maybe sometimes the podcast format doesn't help that, or even just the immediate talking, is this good? I don't know, it just came out kind of thing. It doesn't really give you the opportunity to meditate on stuff. So I wanted to hear Daniel's thoughts on movies he may have changed his mind on, or books, or media, or anything. Because I have definitely had, and I'll share officially how I feel about Halloween Ends later, but I've definitely had a lot of thoughts since seeing the movie, and I've seen some interesting thoughts online about the movie, and at risk of being told you just changed your opinion because someone uploaded a video or something like that, I kind of wanted to do a whole episode talking about this concept, right? This changing of opinions and stuff. So just because I actually wrote down a couple things. First off, I rewatched all the David Gordon Green movies in the span of a week. And it was a very entertaining experience. And so I took a lot of notes there. But I also wrote notes for in the case of other movies or other media that I've engaged. My opinions have changed. But I wanted to first hear how you have experienced that, and then kind of continue with that.
Sure. Yeah. First, let me just say that I think a general part of being a healthy, mentally well human being is sort of accepting the fact that our opinions are always kind of changing in some way. Like, even if you have an initially positive opinion about something, whether it be something as minimal as a movie or another person, those feelings themselves also change and evolve. Like how much you like something, how deeply you love something, those things should always be shifting and changing. And so I do think it's unfortunate that, to an extent, the way that people look at and process their feelings towards art and movies in particular, in this current online age, tends to be so binary. And so, like, initial reaction is this: I hate this thing, therefore it's terrible, and everyone who doesn't like it is stupid. Like, that is just both, it's just not fun. Like, I don't think it's fun to try and have a conversation with those types of people about anything, but also it's just impractical. Like, you'll find yourself growing more fond of things or disliking things or becoming even just neutral on things that you once were passionate about as time goes on.
On that particular topic, I didn't do this because I also am trying to just relax this week. I took off work specifically to rest and not be constant, just not to just switch from doing work to podcasting, but I almost rewatched The Last Jedi specifically to kind of test this out. Not even test it. I've experienced change in opinion before, but that's like the most internet controversial thing to talk about. So like, which is so dated.
Like, I still see people reference it as like shorthand for like a bad franchise movie,
which is crazy because like even I haven't watched it since the first time in theaters, but my feelings on it have changed in contrast to the other two films, the sequel trilogy. But all that to say is I was going to watch that, but it's also like 2.5 hours and I was not going to do that. I wanted to relax, so I chose not to.
It's interesting because like that opening weekend, I don't know if I was just like in different groups, and this actually kind of illustrates my point where it's like the critical reviews were very positive, and like Rian Johnson is like a well-liked director. He's coming off of some of the people's favorite Breaking Bad episodes. He directed Brick, he directed Looper. He has nothing but hits, and then he goes from that to Knives Out. But there's still people, maybe it's because they only watch Star Wars films, who are just like, he's terrible. And it's just, have you watched literally a single second of anything else he's ever directed? But even then, like, I remember some of the initial reactions being positive because there's always positive initial reactions to every Star Wars thing. I think Rise of Skywalker is the first one that didn't have that like initial buzz of word of mouth opening weekend, but everyone's like collectively had their mind wiped to think that it was just overwhelmingly negative the whole time, which just isn't true. To sort of like circle back around, like, first off, I think, again, part of being a healthy person is accepting that like, maybe you were wrong about this movie that you passionately hated, or maybe the reasons that you didn't like it are tied to aspects of yourself that have changed. Like, I think part of what makes being discerning towards movies, like thinking about them, what makes that healthy is you can actually sort of gauge your own maturity as a person to an extent. Because everyone has this experience where as a kid, well, not everyone, but a lot of people I know have this experience where as a kid, you just like movies and cartoons and TV shows. Mm-hmm. You're like, everything is put on. And
now now it's YouTube videos of counting on your fingers and scary looking eggs.
Finger family fun videos. Yeah. Kids unboxing videos. Well, yeah. Just to pretend like it's still 1998 for a second. Like, you have that moment where your parents go, we're going to the movies, and you're just excited because every time you go to the movies is a magical, wonderful experience.
Pokemon 2000. I'm so excited.
Yeah. And you just, oh my gosh. Like, and we're going to see Aladdin, we're going to see her kids, whatever. And then you have that sinking feeling the first time as a kid, you're watching something and you go, this is boring, or I don't like this. And you realize, like, actually, I don't like every movie I see. Then like your reaction become very like gut instinct initial thing. Like, this doesn't have any cartoons in it, I don't like it. Like, this isn't animated, I don't like it.
Right, because you're trying to figure out what you like and don't like.
What is your taste? And so you're developing your taste. And then as you get older, you find that the reasons you like things tend to shift and change. And that's why, like, there's a stereotype of like when you hit middle school and high school, movies that are just a little different, a little weird, really just hit you different. You love.
Have you guys seen Donnie Darko?
You love Donnie Darko. You love Boondock Saints and Pulp Fiction.
Fight Club.
You like everything Christopher Nolan makes, And so just like, because these movies are trippy and weird, man, they make you think, because it's the first time you're really processing movies as maybe more than just entertainment. These movies make you feel something. These movies elicit reactions out of you that you don't get from just watching Power Rangers and Pokemon. Like, they're making you feel things. They're actually playing with the medium in some way. And hey, actually, what if a movie went backwards? What if a movie messed with timelines? What if it was out of order? But then as you get older, you move away from that. You're like, oh, those dumb like teen kino movies, because you start realizing that like, hey, there's a huge world of movies and things out there outside of that, and movies can be good but not for you, or they can be good but in like a not as good as like, you know, other movies kind of way, or whatever. And then you specifically trying to carve out your own niche and prove you're smarter than those dumb people that like movies that everyone likes. And then you hit another point where you get older and you're like, man, Godzilla is the best. And I like this movie because there's rubber monsters in it. And you realize that there's just an inherent joy in making movies. And actually it's okay if like you just have your own opinions and you like movies that no one else likes, or you like movies that everyone likes, and that's okay. And there's this whole like evolution of like realizing that like it's a joy to like things, and then it's a joy to like your own things. You find things you like in your own, and then there's a joy and like really having a distinct taste that it really is different from everyone else. And you realize it's just, again, you circle back around to that childlike, hey, movies are just great, and it's awesome to love movies, and you don't have to be a pretentious like jerk about it all the time.
You start to like why other people like movies, even if they're movies you don't like.
Right.
You start to get interested.
You start like, oh, it's awesome that you saw something that you liked. That's great. Yeah. And I thought of a couple things that really like sort of, for me, this is part of the timeline of like just my opinion changing on something. Because like, you know, as your tastes evolve and as your opinions change and you realize that like, you know, movies aren't competitive, you could just like them.
Yeah,
and
you're not trying to beat movies. Yeah.
You're not trying to prove that you're better than them.
Hey there, it's your friendly neighborhood call to action. Just checking in on you. Hope you're doing all right. I'm just stopping by to say, you know, if you enjoy the show, you can always subscribe and write a review for Cinematic Doctrine. There's iTunes, Podchaser, basically anywhere you listen. You can give us a shout out with a thumbs up, 5 stars, gripping positivity. Or if you hate the show, you can say that too.
Wait, what? What are you saying? Why are you saying that?
Well, I'm not going to tell them what to do, Ted. They're free to do what they want. Our analytics say we got a lot of listeners in the US, and you know they love their freedoms. And you're also free to check out our Twitter. Very active there. We host polls, memes. There's also the Cinematic Doctrine Facebook group called Cinematic Doctrine Facebook Group. If you want to join, just answer the questions, read the rules, and tell them the podcast sent you. Also, you should check out our website. Some really cool stuff there. Editorials, written reviews for movies we haven't had time to cover. Always check out cinematicdoctrine.com when you get the chance. Oh, Ted also told me I shouldn't forget to mention the Patreon. Something about you can support us or something? Wait, Ted, I thought this was like a hobby thing. You want me to
expand Cinematic Doctrine? You know this already.
Right. Yeah, I forgot. I'm the one who put all this together. Yeah, Cinematic Doctrine has a Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can gain access to early uncut episodes of the podcast. Oh, and did I mention, you get to tell us what to do. That's right, each month you get to vote on a movie we discuss on the show. Anyways, I gotta run, so I'll see you guys later.
That this was kind of your praying child. Like you really were pushing for this episode because you had a strong, I guess, mental journey through this whole thing. So like, why did you really want to sort of talk about this topic?
Yeah, So when it came to like my experience of being on the internet, I was definitely a part of the like cynical group of the internet while growing up. And now anyone who listens to the show definitely still gets a taste of that occasionally because I have a cynical wit about a lot of things. But I also am a lot more measured and gentle. And that's definitely the Lord like really changing my heart there. Not just about media. I'm talking just life in general. But because of that, I'm prone to like, if you have things like changing opinions, it's almost a sign of weakness to do that. And so like, although I find jokes like this funny, there's like jokes that Kat and I will have where it's sort of like, oh, new Red Letter Media dropped. Finally, my opinion's here or something like that. Or like YMS puts up a new video about some movie and it's like, yeah, my opinion showed up. Because some people will watch people like that or Anthony Fantano with his needle drop music reviews and they'll almost parrot those thoughts as opposed to developing theirs. Now, I'm not one to actually think that that's inherently bad. I think part of why we like reviews and criticism and engaging other people's thoughts is it helps us understand our own thoughts and gives us language for them. And that's part of learning. That's part of developing. That's part of living in a community, even if it's online. And I watched Halloween Ends in theaters. I said in the episode, and I still stand by most of pretty much everything I said, except for like one or two things. That like I groaned in the theater. I laughed at the movie. I thought it was silly. I was frustrated with the movie because I was enjoying things, but not enjoying it the way I think it was intended, or at least like it from the director. But for me, I was having so much difficulty keeping up, not because he's smarter than me, but because I can't like figure it out. And that's an inherently frustrating thing. Like it's like I had a van once where it always wanted to go to the left, so I had to use the wheel to tilt to the right at all times, and I could never just go straight. I always had to keep it because the alignment was so off, and I think that's what it was in the car. But all that to say is like I feel like people have experienced that with cars before, so they know that experience, and that's what it felt like with Halloween Ends. So we do our episode. And then like the rest of the week, Kat and I are just talking about the movie. In fact, even up to the episode, like we were just talking about the movie, the character of Corey Cunningham, and just sort of like the other movies too. Like I was constantly thinking, because talking about slander, you slandered me. You said I feel justified because your comment about this movie being a trilogy you'd watch one after another is completely out the window. Which to me, I was like, all right, challenge accepted. I'm gonna try it. And unfortunately, I watched the first one on like a Tuesday, the second one, Halloween It Kills, on like a Thursday, and then which I watched on HBO Max, and the player is so bad. And then I finally watched Halloween Kills. Halloween Ends on like I want to say Wednesday of this week, so it was like almost a week later. And I watched it, and throughout all the movies I took notes. But then this happened too, where I took so many notes on Ends that I was like, I don't really think I watched that movie. So I went out and I came home and I just put it back on again. So I watched it twice on Wednesday, Halloween Ends. And honestly, I was actually glad I did, because it was nice to just kind of watch it without taking notes. There was a few times where I noticed something new, reached for my notepad, left it there, and just kind of got cozy again to just watch the movie. And I gotta say, I like the movie. I think it's actually pretty good. I'm really on board with it. Red Letter Media also put out their video talking about it with their half in the bag, and they both liked it, Jay and Mike, and their thoughts were actually really, I thought, pretty good. But they brought up really interesting points that I didn't think about. Some insights that were pretty cool. One of which in particular that kind of sold me was we joked about a part in Halloween Ends where Corey wakes up on Halloween Day in the house where, spoilers from here on out for Ends, and I guess the other movies too, but Ends. Corey wakes up on the house on October 31st, and Laurie's like sitting on a chair. And in their video, they notice that Laurie throws a paper airplane, and there would be no way that Laurie knew that in the beginning of the film, before Jeremy falls down the stairs and dies, he's making paper airplanes, and that's what they did. They built paper airplanes before watching a movie, and then, of course, Jeremy ends up dying. So Mike proposed that was how you could tell that all of this scene was happening in his mind, in Corey's mind. It wasn't a real thing. And for us, like, we criticized the movie for Laurie just being kind of like Loomis on steroids, like really bizarre, and like that scene in particular being strange. But like that, and there is a part in the movie where Corey does tell Allison that like the night that the kid died, like they were making paper airplanes. And so you could theorize that Allison then told Laurie, so maybe Laurie did abduct Corey and then put him in the house to talk to him. But like that to me, I think was like, oh, maybe this movie was a bit smarter than like I was giving it credit for, which we both argued that the movie was not smart. So again, I just felt compelled to watch it again, which isn't the first time that stuff like this has happened to me. Like there's plenty of movies and media where like I've watched it or read it or engaged it and just kind of wanted to sit on it, was frustrated, almost like conversing with it in my head, where I was like, didn't like it, but then it kept talking to me. And so I had to keep figuring out like why. And in this particular case, like, I think it was because the movie actually was pretty good. Like even the silly burn it all down, I'll light the match line, like in that conversation, like Corey's talking to Allison and he starts to then monologue crying, like emotionally, like about like wanting to leave and burning, like being poetic, like saying we can burn it down, burn the things that are keeping us down, keeping us here down, and get out. But then of course the Mulaney guy, the ex-boyfriend, comes over to talk to Allison while he's a little drunk. And so like it wasn't out of nowhere. And there were even a couple other lines that weren't out of nowhere. Like when Laurie's like, he's letting the evil into, which that isn't exactly it. It's she says something like he's down a dark path, which just sounds silly. But then that's what the dad of the kid who died, Jeremy's dad says to Laurie when he talks about having run into him on the side of the road. So it's like there were just things that I guess I don't know. I was very sick when I went to go see that movie. I was not alert. I wasn't contagious, so I wasn't being like irresponsible. But there were just things when I went to see it that were making it harder for me to engage it. Plus, it's not irrational to say the advertising did not prepare me for the movie. So like I was getting frustrated about that. And there's plenty of movies that's done that. It Comes at Night is the premium one where like if you saw the trailers and then you saw It Comes at Night, you did not like It Comes at Night probably. You may not know this, but the easiest way you can show your support for Cinematic Doctrine is to rate and review the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. So press pause and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you have to say. And then press play again so you can hear the rest of the show.
That was definitely a period of my life too, where like I didn't really pay attention to trailers or anything. For me, it was just like there's a couple people whose opinion I trust, and like if I just see something that has like a lot of positive reviews, like that was a period of my life where I was going to the movies almost every weekend.
Yes, yeah.
Sometimes multiple times a week. So I just like, oh, that people say that one's good, I'll check that out, and I would like be kind of like aware of what genre it was in, and so like I was just very open to movies at that time. So I wasn't. Like, I didn't go in with any expectations. I didn't expect to be really scared. Also, like, I just knew, like, oh, it's A24. So, like, there's a chance that this won't be at all what anyone expects. Or this will be, like, a horror film, but, like, a different kind of horror film. So, like, I was just in a right kind of space for that. And you could argue that for something like Last Jedi or Hollywood Ends or any of these types of movies, like, people just weren't going in with the right kind of mentality for them.
Especially Last Jedi. You had 2 years of people theorizing
and then
like what the movie will be. And then they had a movie in their head so that when they saw it and it didn't match that movie, it was like the worst.
I don't necessarily think that's a full like pass. Like I don't think a movie gets out of being
right, exactly
criticized for that. And or like I'm not a huge fan of like when people, especially with this actually happened with a lot of Halloween Ends, which is like, well, when you compare it to all these other Halloween movies, it's not that bad. Which is like, I mean, that's not an excuse. Like, you know, I don't have a strong attachment necessarily to the lore of the franchise. Like, even when I was explaining, like, I like these are things I like about, like, I like that Michael Myers is like a completely random person. I like that Laurie is like completely random, and like Halloween 2 already kind of ruins that. So you went on this thing where you went and you rewatched it and you really gave the movie a huge chance and you feel like your opinion has changed on it.
Completely.
And so like, what is it about that kind of like process that you felt so compelled to like talk about?
Yeah. Part of it is to just so I could say, I told you so about the watching them back to back. I actually found that they all connected a lot better in terms of atmosphere and tone. So there is a bit of you could say spite, but I didn't do it with malicious intent. I just thought it was funny, and also that's part of podcasting, baby, is having banter and not even recording and still having that spite energize you. Yeah, I really did believe when we talked about Halloween Kills, like that. I feel like these movies are probably being made with much more connective tissue. I had not watched 2018 then because I did not like 2018 since I had seen it. And then I rewatched it like last week and I was like, what the heck? This movie's great. What am I talking about? I
was very surprised you didn't like it. I
didn't like it when we saw it in theaters. I was just not into it. I was not on board. But then, which again, like that's the development and process. Like I didn't like it then. I had pretty strong reasons for why. I literally found the movie so boring I counted my yawns. And then I rewatched it last week and I was like, no, this movie's really good. It's really smart. I took a lot of notes with that one, how like I thought the idea of a true crime podcast showing up to interview Michael Myers and then like to go and then interview Laurie Strode was inherently interesting to me. And the way that they kind of get treated by the fact that like Michael Myers kills them is almost like, especially when they are so distant that they have accents. Like they're definitely from like England or something. They're so like just the estrangement of them being so far from the tragedy. And it sounds like they are already like successful. So like this is like bottom of the barrel thing. They don't make it clear that it's a specific project they care about. And even the man out of the two is very aggressive about just wanting the story. Like he asks some questions that are kind of crazy to Laurie. Laurie just kicks him out. It's really good. And then they get killed, which to me was like really worked. And kind of seeing how the film talked about that was great. And then it transitions right into Michael actually going around and killing people. Yeah, I liked the development of Laurie's character being kind of this post-traumatic stressed crazy version where she's like got this crazy awesome house that like even that becomes more developed during the final scene when it's like super smart. Like she can check a room, clear it off, close it, and like have it locked down. All that stuff was like it combined the smartness that you want from a horror movie with the crazy cheekiness of like a random rental you got because the movie you wanted wasn't there and you didn't know what you were trying to get, but you knew it was rated. You knew it was a horror movie and it's got some violence, some fun stuff like that. So it was clever in that way. And then I also just liked how the first movie, just like I said with Kills, the first movie just feels like a real town with real people. It's very active, tons of extras, shot on location. And Michael Simmons, I think, shot all three of the movies with David Gordon Green. And there's a cinematic profile between all three that makes them really feel good to watch that I'm just not getting with a lot of movies nowadays. So I almost just want to follow Simmons. I'm curious if he's going to work with David Gordon Green on the Exorcist movie that he's actually working on. Yeah, that was enjoyable. And then, I liked the family dynamic of the film that like you had Laurie Strode's freaking out. Karen, her daughter, is just sort of like frustrated with her mom being so like not good, and then Allison being compassionate. And actually I didn't realize this was Annie Matichak's first role. It said introducing for her, and which typically for movies tells you this is their first role, which to me is inherently interesting because I like when a big franchise of some kind, or at least a known franchise, introduces new actors, because I would like more of that, honestly. And I thought that was a good way of like, because that Halloween introduced Laurie Strode, or introduced Jamie Lee Curtis. So I thought that was good. But her performance is really good in Annie Matichak. And I also, of course, saw parallels with how she treats Laurie to how she treats Corey in Ends. Specifically when Laurie shows up in the there's a dinner scene in the first film in 2018 when Laurie shows up and they weren't expecting her to show up, and she's just manic, starts crying because Michael just got let out of prison. He's getting transferred. And she saw him, and like Karen's just so not nice to her mom, but Allison is sympathetic. And so when Laurie steps out, Allison goes out to comfort her, which is very similar to the scene in Ends when Corey gets kicked out of the bar, or chased out of the bar because the mother of Jeremy starts targeting him, and Allison goes out to be, and they're both next to a road too, a busy road. So it adds some aesthetic similarity. But yeah, I like the first movie a lot. Rewatching it, I was like, this movie's good. It's great. It's smart. And I don't think that we talked about how Kills and Ends like kind of like takes the first movie where all three generations come together to stop this disaster, which I think the movie can be enjoyed by itself apart from Kills and Ends. I know it's a trilogy, but I never have difficulty with that. Like, I know the sequel trilogy, we mentioned Star Wars, like kind of disrupts some of the canon, but I don't like need to treat it like it exists when I enjoy movies I just like. So like Return of the Jedi, like the fact that like, Anakin kills or Darth Vader kills the Emperor doesn't get ruined by the fact that the Emperor is just still alive, like in a cave somewhere, like making Snokes like Legos. I don't know. That doesn't like affect me. So I don't feel that Kills and Ends kind of disrupts that. And then, rewatching Kills, I don't need to get into that again, but again, I enjoyed it. And I rewatching 2018 with it right after, I just liked how they felt like a really long night. I just thought that was pretty cool. How the two movies capture the experience of staying up late and going outside, and it's just quiet. There's no cars. There's like no people. It's just like strange. Everything feels late. You can kind of feel the bags just collecting under your eyes while watching those two movies. Maybe because you don't like Kills, but for me, I do. And just further confirmed kind of how I felt that like the first movie is Laurie not being right, that Michael is not like trying to find her and kill her, but that it's like this guy, like the new Loomis, which also was clever. I thought that was a clever like joke about like trying to just hack writers over the years, desperately trying to have a reason for Michael to show up and fight Laurie, just to put a character whose sole purpose is to just like, this is what I think will happen if I could just get them together or something. And then the fact that his dying words are like, can you say something, Michael? And then Michael crushes his head is an irony of like just someone desperately wanting Michael to represent something more than just a killing machine. I don't know. So 2018 was great. I really enjoyed rewatching it. And then going into Kills, I thought all those themes were carried in well. And then Kills lays into Ends by having the whole town just be ridiculous and getting a mental patient to kill themselves in that movie. Enjoying this episode? Grab that share link and tell your friends. Word of mouth is the most effective way for a podcast to reach new listeners, so don't be shy. Share the episode wherever you can. Yeah, and then and in 2018, pretty much everybody's nasty to Allison. Like, it isn't that everyone becomes horrible because of Halloween Kills and then Michael Myers destroying a bunch of people. Like in Ends, they kind of build it that way a little. They don't build it that way, but they kind of like allude. I'm sure the people would say that they've all gone mad because of Michael, kind of like Laurie, who then swaps with the whole town. Like Laurie's chill and totally fine. We kind of joked and criticized that like Laurie should be totally over. Like she should hate Halloween. And in a way, like her and the entire family hated Halloween in 2018 to the point that Karen just wears like a Christmas sweater. They just skip Halloween. Like they just don't care about it. But she's wearing a Christmas sweater the whole movie, the whole two movies pretty much. And yeah, to have the whole town start being like monstrous and overtly nasty and Ends while Laurie is sort of recovered, to me is like an interesting swap and parallel between the two, where Laurie's the nuts one in the first one and the whole town is kind of like, what's your big deal? So there's a lot of like continued themes throughout the movies. Again, I don't think the movies were all, maybe they were pitched as a trilogy and it was like, hey, well, we'll see how this first one does before we do more. Because people who write stuff, they always have ideas for more, but they don't commit to it unless a big check is given to them or something like that. But I do feel that the movies do well, regardless of whether it's intended to be a trilogy or not. At the very least, looking at the previous film and continuing some major themes, especially Ends. And on Red Letter Media, they felt, especially Jay Bowman, felt that Ends actually kind of carries the themes and exploration of evil from the first movie. And it's not so much an exploration because it's like part of what makes the first movie so enjoyable is it's just a killing machine shows up in a small town and kills some babysitters. Of course, then you have the Loomis edition that adds some mysticism to it. But he felt that Ends was, as opposed to the other movies, an actual sequel to like the first film, 1978, because it kind of explored evil in a different way by having Corey kind of be this horribly tragic and extremely interesting character that I've come to really like. Yeah, I don't know. It just started to click to me, and now I think the movie's great. I think it's a really good movie. I like all three movies. I see myself. Yeah, that's okay. I like all three movies. I think they're good. I'm a stand now for every single one. I think they're just really well made. I think they're really good looking. I think they're well directed. At the very least, I know in our episode, our primary for Ends, we both agreed like David Gordon Green's a good director. He knows how to stage scenes. He knows how to set. He has a vision of what the script entails, and he's able to add some pretty incredible details to them to make them feel alive. And I do think Michael Simmons is part of what helps that, because the cinematography in these movies is great. There's so much natural light throughout all three movies. I don't really think there's ever really a time where it's a floodlight, other than if it's in the setting, like in the first one when Laurie Strode's like bunker house has like it's like Evil Dead house on steroids. It when that has all the floodlights, that's like the only time. But for the most part, like it really is like I just think they're really good movies. And at this point, like it's going to be interesting to see like if the franchise continues beyond this point. Obviously they're going to continue it, but like the way this movie ends, Halloween ends, leaves itself open to being like we could follow Allison's character because she ends up moving away, and like seeing what happens with her character. Because at this point, the precedent has been set that like not Michael, but just the Mask, just like seeing Corey Cunningham just kill people in the suit and mask is enough for me to enjoy the aesthetic of the killer. Insofar as it's killing, it's some crazy kills it ends, but like the precedent of ends being like the evil changes shape, like the idea of people can just become evil and develop into monsters, and all that stuff like makes it so that the Halloween franchise can continue down this canon if it wanted to, but that's up to whoever decides what to do next. And partly because, you know, critical response, and this Halloween Ends made the least amount of money out of the three opening weekend. And of course, part of that is because it's on Peacock. It opened on Peacock as well, which really is unfortunate. But I also know it's in response to Kills. A lot of people didn't like Kills. I'm like the only one. But even though like we won opening weekend both for Kills and Ends, and our theater was packed. So I don't know. I think they're good. I liked Ends, and I like Corey. I have some good notes on him, and like I think Ends is an interesting exploration of like the idea of someone becoming evil or developing into evil. There's a lot of connective tissue in terms of the atmosphere of Haddonfield throughout each movie. WURG, the radio station, you hear it in Kills. Characters that are brought up in the other movies come up in the later movies. The jerky kid Mulaney in the Kills flashback, he is the cop boyfriend in Ends. Like there's just a lot of good connected stuff, to the point that like if you're desperate for a setting that feels real during a time where everything's just the Mandalorian CG background stuff, like these movies really satisfy that itch for me. So, but what do you think of what I think, Daniel?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's good. Like, I appreciate like what you're like saying going for. I mean, it's like, because like I think I said this during the Holland's review, which is on paper, I really like this idea. Like, and I really like what they're going for. I just personally I wasn't a fan of the execution. And even now, like maybe if I went back and watched them all back to back, my opinion would change. But
well, who's got time for that?
Yeah, I just wasn't vibing with Kills. So like, I don't know. Like, I didn't like Kills. I didn't like Ends. And so for me, like, I just don't know if it's worth the investment of time just to see maybe if I like these movies, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, like, it's admirable what you're going for. I don't know. Like, yeah, like I know it's like, I'm not trying to shoot your premise in the face here, but like,
no, I get it.
You know, I mean, it's good. It's, I support you. This is, you know, if this is how you want to live your life, Melvin, I'm, you know, no, like I think it's good and healthy to give things a second chance or even a third chance. Like I've mentioned this before, but like they'll tell you in film school, like you should watch a movie 3 times before you review it. Because sometimes that initial just impression you get from watching a movie once isn't actually like how you'll end up feeling about it, you know? And I think this might be good. I think, and there's quite a few films where like the initial audience reaction to them was negative for a variety of reasons, whether like it was too ahead of its time or it just really wasn't what audiences expected at all.
The Thing and Blade Runner, the same weekend, were reviewed poorly.
Yeah.
and Blade Runner is different because it was also a different cut than we're experiencing now. So there's a part of that, but still, like, they were critically disregarded.
Yeah, there's an Alien game for the original PlayStation that like bombed the reviewers and bombed commercially, and the big sticking point was this quote, difficult and hard to understand controls, and the big thing was,
Oh yeah.
yeah. With for those who know, the right analog stick moved and the left analog stick aimed, which now that's pretty standard. But at the time, no one else was doing that. This is tank control time, baby.
Yes, it was tank controls. No one did it, and the reason I think Halo made it work is because they have such a magnetic aim assist, and I don't think aim assist existed for that Alien game. So it was almost like just taking the idea and developing on it made it more palatable, which we see all the time with movies. I wrote that like Halloween Ends is sort of an interesting exploration of like evil and developing like a catharsis in violence, and that happened in 2019 with Joker, and that happened in like 1969 with Taxi Driver. I don't remember what year that came out, but like that concept of like a patient frustration, it was basically pioneered with Paul Schrader. So like these things are always kind of the same idea, just with a different flavor. And in the case of Ends, it definitely didn't connect with a lot of people. A lot of people don't like it because for various reasons, which I still agree with. I think that if people are valid to have wants for a movie, I don't think it's unreasonable that people saw Halloween 3 and were frustrated there's no Michael in it. Like you were just trained for 2 movies to expect Michael to be there. So it's not irrational to go, I don't like that one. That makes total sense. Hey there, listener. Want to influence the podcast? Head on over to patreon.com/cinematic doctrine and support the show for $3 a month. In doing so, you'll be able to vote on a movie poll that picks a film we discuss each month. So jump on over there and have your voice heard.
It gets into the question of, can audiences be wrong? Like, on the one hand, like, I don't think audiences are wrong for expecting the movie they're advertised. But, like, I also don't think, even if the movie had been more properly advertised, like, at a certain point, like, audience expectation is built into a particular franchise where, it's a Halloween movie. Those are the movies where Michael Myers shows up and stabs people. And, as much as people want to poke fun at the fact that Halloween as a franchise is complete nonsense, and for some people that's the appeal. They're Halloween fans because it's such a confusing, convoluted mess where we're on like the 4th or 5th different like timeline or whatever. And so for some people that's part of the fun. But other people, like, their experience with Halloween is they saw the first one, and then maybe they saw snippets of other ones like on TV, or like they got like Halloween 4 on like a DVD Halloween collection or whatever, alongside Jeepers Creepers 2 and, a Friday the 13th movie on those multi-packs. And then like they went out to the theater to see Halloween H2O, and then they went to see Halloween, the David Gordon Green one, because, and so for their context of Halloween, they're expecting a particular type of movie. And
when I went to the bank for my job, I sometimes have to visit. I'll talk with the teller, and they were asking about Halloween Ends, and she specifically went, "Is this the one where she kills her brother?" So, like 4 years ago, they set up, even in the trailers, like this is just they're going to follow the first one, skip the rest, and then David Gordon Green's 2018 will be the sequel to that one. They set up like there's nothing, and she's still the teller. For her experience is like, I just like watching them, and they're still siblings. So John Carpenter, I'm sorry, but your drunken decision to do that just to get the script out and get some money is just like, you can't fix that. It's still there, and for most audiences, that's kind of how they feel.
Well, yeah, Halloween is an amorphous like collective pool that like all the movies in the brain are just mixed in there.
Yeah,
and so, they're waiting for the Michael from the Rob Zombie ones to show up at some point to fight this Michael, or whatever. Because
it was like, weird. He didn't talk in this movie. That's what they'll feel
doesn't he
with
do
Rob
that?
Zombie.
Where's the woman on the white horse? It's my favorite part. Yeah. So I think to an extent audiences can be wrong. Like I think there's something where you need to give the movie some credit and also like the room to be the movie it's trying to be. There's like a now infamous review of the movie Tar, which for those who are not familiar with it, it's like a movie that's exploring like a not great character played by Kate Blanchett, who like all of her past mistakes are coming back to finally cultivate into like a big comeuppance thing. And like there's a now infamous review where someone's like, I didn't like this. I would have much preferred a movie where like we celebrate this woman in the workforce who's like achieving, and like basically they're like, I wish this movie was like inspirational,
A different
like,
movie.
I wish this movie started a different character and the character was in a different film and the movie was about something completely different.
Right.
Which I guess if you're judging it by that criteria of if this is like an inspirational like film about a woman overcoming obstacles, then yeah, lots of movies are going to be bad by that scale.
And you know what? Going back to your development of like from childhood to adulthood, how we interpret films individually, that is just a problem of, I felt a certain way about this movie. Here's what I think I feel about it. And like, you could see a way in which you describe like, this is the movie I saw. This is how I felt about it. I wish it was more of a positive depiction of this, because for them, maybe they're just thinking about like, I want more positive depictions of women in film, because maybe all I've ever watched is poor depictions of women in film or whatever. Maybe they just watch specifically whatever is on Best of the Worst, because it's just always exploiting women. But like, yeah, like just you could see like a way in which translating all that, like, that's why like I labor so heavily to even argue like the Halloween Kills I watched is not the one you watched, because I'm thinking about it in a way that's so different. And then I try to articulate that. And sometimes when you can't do that, you come off silly and you become a meme, because that's true. Like again, like Turning Red at the beginning of the year, where the person was just like, this seems like a movie made just for that person's friends or whatever. I forget what that person said. What was it? It was a movie for specifically second generation Canadian. Like, it's just like, what? What are you talking about? And of course,
the only review that matters is the person who wondered why they didn't address 9/11.
Wait, like, what? In what?
Turning Red.
Oh, was that like, was it set in 2001 or something?
It's set in like 2002 or something, the movie. And they're like, why don't they, like, they basically said the effect of like, why did they address 9/11?
Why did they, or
why
did they
didn't
not?
they? Like, why doesn't it come up?
Why? Because like the stadium gets destroyed by a giant panda bear?
Yeah, or something. And so people started posting different memes of just like the panda looking like sad, but with a text like, oh no, a second plane has hit the towers or something.
Second panda showed up.
You know,
that's pretty funny.
Just like, yeah, I guess if we're judging every movie by how it handles the topic of 9/11, again, lots of movies.
I didn't like this movie. Nicolas Cage didn't show up. I know he wasn't billed, but why wasn't he there?
So where Mark Wahlberg is salivating, like, finally, like, I'm going to make the movie that I want to make.
Yeah, one Vietnamese person shows up. He gives it 1 star. It's just like, we're never letting you get past that one, Mark. Sorry, buddy. Oh, man.
Have you downloaded his Catholic app?
Does he have a Catholic app?
The ad is just like to help you stay prayed up or something.
What in the world?
And it's like, I could stay prayed up. I could use this app. Gosh, where was I going with any of that?
Just like part of what affects like audience participation in movies sometimes is almost a wider variation than critics, because for critics, like, you're doing it sometimes because you want to and sometimes because you have to. I think on the podcast, more Daniel's experiences have to more than want to, because we'll just be like, hey, we should do this weekend because it comes out, or because of Patreon stuff. But there's a different way you're engaging it, because it's also like, this is what you're doing. Whereas for audiences, most of the time is you just see a movie and like, I didn't like it, or I liked it, or I think I read like a piece on Terrifier 2 on New York Times, and like the journalist was there. So there was 18 people when the movie started, 14 when it left, or when it ended. And when he was leaving, he asked one of the attendees, and it was like a 22-year-old girl who typically doesn't like horror. And she's like, I don't really like horror, but I like this one. And that was it. That's all she thought, or at least all that was penned. But like, sometimes it's just simpler. And I know for this discussion, we're more talking about like the development of how we engage movies and stuff. But yeah,
there's the initial, like, the hump that some people are going to need to get by is there are people who want to think about movies and other people who don't. And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. Like, I definitely think it's more healthy and useful to try and be somewhat thoughtful when you're watching a movie, or
reading a book, or listening to a sermon,
engaging with any sort of art, of which like art, part of why it exists is for you to engage with it in some way. Yeah. But like some people are never going to get past that. They're just going to like, I just like being entertained. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to see something. And whatever my initial reaction, for whatever reason it is, that's what I think about the movie.
Yeah,
and
no
like,
vomiting. Yeah, that kind of
so
thing.
yeah, so then it's dead to them. And so like I have a friend, and infamously she just has some of the worst movie opinions that ever existed. The example I always give to sort of illustrate what I'm talking about is she saw the movie Silver Linings Playbook, and it's like, what'd you think of it? And she's like, oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. And this is when the movie was really ramping up and getting a lot of awards buds and stuff. So I was intrigued because I hadn't seen the movie yet. I was like, well, why didn't you like about it? She's like, oh, it was just awful. And finally, like after getting her to talk about it, she's like, there was just so much yelling in the movie. And that was it. That was her entire opinion, is they yelled at each other. So she didn't like the movie. And I have spent years trying to parse out why this one thing has like, and so I started asking her like, okay, what'd you think of this movie? What'd you think of this movie? And it's just like she would have like the most specific one thing about the movie. She didn't like it. She didn't like the movie Buried with Ryan Reynolds. She just didn't like it. And like, there was no reason for it. I tried, is it because it's in one location? Do you not like Ryan Reynolds? Is it because it has like a downer ending? It's like, oh, I just didn't like it. And like, I could never, and this fascinated me because like, I try to be like, I always can articulate something about my feelings about things. Like I can always tell you like why I did or did not like something.
Which is definitely a learned trait. I mean, that's kind of probably where you're headed, but like people learn to communicate what's inside of them, and some people can't, or for certain things don't.
Yeah. She's a writer though.
Right. So like in this case, she chooses not to, but maybe in writing she can. It's isn't it? It's strange. Sometimes we just have these things in our brain.
Writer, preacher, like every other aspect of her life, she can articulate. She can share feelings.
What's interesting is with music. Although I like listening to music, and I can explain why I like it, I can't ever figure out how to negatively critique music because I like really weird music. And so like when I think about movies, I can tell you what I like and I don't like, and what I think is a good film and what I think is a bad film. But if you tell me that like Trout Mask Replica is a bad album, I'll go, what are you talking about? Because like my brain can't figure out how to say that that's a bad album because it's sound and that's interesting. Like it just becomes that. So like I can understand like the idea of like a part of your brain, a concept of reality just being almost incomprehensible and really hard to communicate, even if like you're literate in some other areas. So like I could understand being like Buried, didn't like it. Why? Just didn't, or something like that. Unless you ask them to like, what's in The Office when Kevin can't do math unless it's about pies. So you have to be like, could you write a novel about why you don't like Buried? And she just sends it to you and you're like, oh, finally, I can understand why you don't like Ryan Reynolds. Oh, man. Hey. We have some Patreon goals we're trying to reach. If we get enough support, we'll review each God's Not Dead movie, as well as The Inhumans, that really bad Marvel show from a couple years ago. Head over to patreon.com/cinematic doctrine and share your support.
Yeah, well, I think there's also like people who are just like stuck there though, and like
can't figure out how to get out of it.
Well, I just like there's never any impetus to like move past that, because for some people that sounds like a lot of work for a movie. There's a tweet that went around recently that was kind of viral where they're like, "Oh, like I just don't think about movies, so I find that I just don't like very many. Like I find that I don't dislike many movies. I like almost every movie I see." And some people were pointing out like this might be more feasible, like if you're someone who only goes to see big blockbuster movies, right? Like if you only see action movies and superhero films, like those movies by design don't require engagement, but like anecdotally, I like the
big colors.
Yeah, as long as it's like a rocking soundtrack and lots of like big bright colors and explosions and maybe. But I tend to find, and this is anecdotal, granted, but like people I find who say things like that, when you try and get them to watch things that do require more engagement or are old or have subtitles, that's those same people like, oh, as long as you don't think about it, like it's easy. You like everything you see. I find like, again, this maybe I'm making assumptions, but I find the same people like the instant you have a movie that requires a level of engagement in order to be enjoyed, that's when they're like, oh, this is terrible. This is boring. Is this what you artsy fartsy people like to watch?
Yes.
And not to we'll get into this when we talk about Black Adam, but there was another viral tweet from someone who I'm a fan of. Like, I watch his videos. He's somebody who has a channel where he talks about comic books. And I won't like say him by name, but like, so like when it comes to comic books, extremely knowledgeable. But he had a tweet where he was like, I bet the people that didn't like Black Adam, I was gonna read, they seem like the type of people who sit around listening to fancy music, talking about how movies are art. Which
the people wait, so he said I bet the people who don't like Black Adam sit around and listen to fancy music and talk about
how
art?
movies are art. And so there's a couple levels of things to dissect about it. And half of responses were like, what do you think fancy music is?
I preemptively assume someone will mock me for the movie that I like, so I will mock them first by a tweet. Like,
the
just like the things you like. It's totally fine.
The best jokes of the tweet are like, I like how this guy's vision of adults is just Frasier.
That's great.
But like when you get over that hump, we're like, yeah, it's good to think about movies. It's good to process your feelings about them. It doesn't limit you. Like, I think there's this fear that like if you do that, you'll stop enjoying like Transformers. But like it actually like it allows you. It opens the door to enjoy other things, but also opens the door for you to enjoy things in a different like way. And so when you get past that, like when you get past your initial emotional response to something, we're like, oh, this movie is upsetting because it's dark. This movie is upsetting because it's violent, or it's a little slow. But then when you push past that, you sit there and you start engaging with the movie, start thinking about them, you start parsing them apart in your mind. This allows you not like, because when we're talking about just like reconsidering your opinions of movies, I don't think we're necessarily talking about just like doing a 180. Like, I like that movie. Then all the reviews come out and they're bad. Well, actually, I didn't like that movie. It's more like, can you personally like consider and think deeply about something where maybe your initial emotional or just baseline reaction, just getting the initial vibe of the movie wasn't positive, but once you take the time to really process it and think about it, then you find there's things about it you actually do like, or once something has settled in, you finally actually like it really resonated with you in a way that maybe initially you were too shell-shocked to think about. And so over time, a movie that maybe you hated can like simmer and process, and then it comes to a place where you actually find that you actually quite enjoyed it. And so like, but that's like a level that I think a lot of people are removed from, because to be fair, like, you go to the movies with some friends, you watch it, you don't think about it ever again, you go back to your job. Be like, if movies are barely hit the level of being a hobby for you, this might be a lot of effort to put in that you just don't have. But perhaps I would encourage you to put that somewhere else. Like maybe you do this for books or music or other forms of art, or even just like, I don't know, like,
I hope the skill exists to develop ideas and wrestle with them, because especially in a Christian worldview, it's extremely important to have that. Like, there are some things that as a born in sin person, you are going to inherently have some frustrations with. I don't know which ones, but I suspect it will exist. And it's going to be really helpful to be like, if something frustrates me or makes me mad that I read in scripture, to then wrestle with and try and figure out why, or maybe find other parts in scripture that reinforce it, or find other parts in scripture that help you understand that maybe your initial thought was incorrect and that you misinterpreted the passage. At the very least, please learn to do that with scripture, because it's going to be extremely helpful if you're not doing it with movies. Like, that's totally fine. Now, the benefit of doing it with movies, apart from your own edification, I think it's enjoyable to learn to like something, because then now you have a new thing you like, which is nice. But also it helps with cultural engagement and understanding. It helps with conversation. It helps with communication. It helps with entertainment, as we are doing with the podcast right now, or always with the podcast, because we feel that we're pompous enough to think that people like hearing us talk. So, and think we have good ideas. But yeah, like, I think, I also just think it's nice to be challenged sometimes. I actually wrote down a couple other things that like I found that I completely changed my opinion on, to the point that they're like things I like a lot. The most interesting one wasn't even a movie, it was a game. It was Doom Eternal, where like I played Doom Eternal and was like, I don't think this game is as good as the first. I think there's too much stuff in it. I think there were too many like enemy types. I thought there was too many guns. I thought there was too much going on. And I played it, and then I was like, well, I'm going to play it again, see how I feel about it. And so I played it again, and then was like, wait a minute, this game is great. It's not that there was too many tools. I just didn't know how to use them all. So I started using them more. My key presses became a grotesquely fast. And then 10 hours would pass and I would learn something new, a new trick, like quick swapping and stuff to avoid reload animations. And it was becoming quicker and I was getting better. And then 10 hours later, I was like, I'll throw the grenade in and learn how to use that. So like I developed over time. And then the same exact experience happened when the DLC came out. They introduced like a new enemy that like completely changed the meta of how you played. And I hated it. I wrote a negative review. I was extremely frustrated. And then 10 hours later, I'm like, this is the best thing they could have added. I thought it was great. And now it's like a game that I think is brilliant. I think it's amazing. I think it's so well thought out. I think it's risky and bold. Like it's challenging. And it's definitely a game where like if you don't learn to play it the way that even the developers, when they were working on the DLC, were learning new things about, then like it's not going to be enjoyable. And it can sound silly when it's a game that's just run around shoot demons, but it's really that deep and complex in terms of gameplay. And that, yeah, every 10 hours, every 15 hours, I had a completely changed experience. The light bulb goes over my head. So now I have like 16 light bulbs over my head that just are like, this game's good. And then, yeah, plenty of movies where it's happened that are more relatable on a movie podcast. Both Panos Cosmatos movies with Beyond the Black Rainbow and Mandy, Catherine and I did not like. And then like kept talking about it for just 2 weeks and then realized we liked them, rewatched them. Hey, don't forget, there's a lot of fun content missing from this episode because you're not listening on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/cinematic doctrine and support for $3 a month to gain access to uncut episodes with upwards of 40 minutes of bonus content each. You'll thank me later. We both are extremely fond of those movies. There's so much to parse through and enjoy. Last broadcast, I've specifically said on this podcast and recommended last year. It's like one of my favorite movies ever. And I hated that the first time I watched it. I thought it was terrible. I was super frustrated by the ending to the point that I would tell people, watch it. You will hate the ending, but you also cannot guess it. You will have no idea what happens at the ending. And I even hate watched it with a friend. I was like, you got to see this. But then we talked about it for like an hour afterward. And then now it's like, I again would keep talking about it. I've loved the movie. I bought a copy on DVD. It was like a rental copy. It's so like just destroyed, but I was so glad to own it. And like saw a local screening because it was actually shot in the area near me and was shot tangential to Blair Witch. Came out a year before. It's last broadcast is often mentioned as like came out before Blair Witch. It's found footage before then, although technically like Cannibal Holocaust has a beat and a couple others, I think. But saw a Q&A with the directors, basically asked them questions for 45 minutes. It was great. Love that movie. I have a collector's edition now from 101 Films. And then, yeah, like some just lighter mentions is like, I did not like Captain America Winter Soldier when it came out. I keep name dropping all these other movies. Let me add some normie movies to the list. Winter Soldier, I did not like. I just thought it was Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic Adventure 2. It was just Shadow. I thought Winter Soldier was just the Shadow character. I was like, if anybody likes it, it's just because it's kind of an edgy character. Like I thought it was silly. I did not like that movie. Now I think it's great. It's like one of the only Marvel movies I own. I think it's a really good action movie. I think it's really well made. Probably the only, there's like 3 out of 6 or 7 good Russo brother movies. Scream 1, the first time I watched it was iffy, but every time I've watched it, I've liked it way more, significantly more. I still like 2 more. That one I just really love. And then, yeah, even the first Candyman, I liked the first time I watched it. And every time I've watched it, I've loved it even more and more because I'm just seeing more and I'm engaging it more. I'm thinking about it more. It's just, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. And so like, it's not typical. It's not abnormal for me to just have changing opinions. I'm trying to think if there's any movies like on my shelf even that like I've owned and now I just don't like. There's not very few. There's definitely movies I've seen that I've kind of changed my opinion on, but some of those are like because of extreme content and like part of it's just like I'm, developing Christian. But yeah, like I think it's just kind of normal. And I don't think we've ever really talked about this on the podcast. So that's why I felt compelled to do this episode. But I don't know if you had anything else or like any movies in particular that you kind of changed on, or even like in a way did the homework like I did, where I would just like, let me rewatch all these movies, see if I change my opinion. But
so, yeah, my angle is more like why I think it's good to revisit and rethink things, because I think it's very rewarding. And so I actually have a couple of examples of that. First, I started with something kind of silly. I've mentioned before that I grew up in a very like protective, sheltered environment. However, my grandparents were the complete opposite, where every time they babysat us, which sometimes was like we would just spend whole summers with my grandparents, we would just go to the movies all the time. That's why I like the movies so much. And so, but they would just pick like whatever family or kids film was out that weekend we saw. So I saw a ton of garbage. This was, early 90s. So this was like really kind of like a golden age for like kind of like Garbo family, like children's films. I would say that as a kid, my favorite Home Alone was Home Alone 3. I saw it in theaters. It's the one that doesn't have Macaulay Culkin in it. It has no relation to the rest of the Home Alone franchise. It features a kid and a parrot, and I just love this movie as a kid. I saw it all the time. I had it on VHS. Same with a movie called Gone Fishing. Have you ever heard of this movie?
I think I know that name. I'm going to look it up. But
it's a not great family film. It reunites Joe Pesci and Danny Glover from Lethal Weapon movies. They star as two of the dumbest human beings to ever live, who the only thing they love is going fishing together. They leave their wives for like a big, long, like yearly big fishing trip or something like that. But they're too like incompetent to the point of farce.
Yo,
and
this movie poster on IMDb is great.
It's it looks like a fake movie poster that like you'd have in 30 Rock or something. It's
not even. It just looks like but I was even thinking like a bootleg poster. Like that looks like a bootleg poster. Like was it you who just showed or someone? It was like a bootleg poster of Halloween, the first one. It's like Michael Myers with like a gun and like explosions and stuff.
Can you imagine how quick that movie would be if it was packing? I love this movie as a kid. I thought it was super funny. And now it's consistently grow up as an adult. I find that it's apparently consistently listed as one of the worst movies of all time.
Wow.
And so like I went back and I've watched both of these movies and it's like not a revelation to find that like movies that were funny as a kid are no longer funny as an adult.
Right.
But like,
yes,
my perception was such that like I saw movies that are routinely considered some of the worst, and I loved them as a kid. But on a more positive note, so first is a sheltered kid. I ended up becoming friends with some of the weirder kids at high school. My high school had zero, like almost no bullying really in the traditional sense. Obviously kids were mean to each other, but I ended up hanging out with,
So Hangman's Curse, the devotional, when I asked if bullying was like that, you could say, no, it wasn't like this at all. It was
not. And so I hung out with the anime kids, theater kids, nerdy kids, got like, all the kids that liked things I thought were cool, but I didn't really know much. So picture sheltered pastor's kid going to weird goth girl's house and all her weird friends, and we sit down and watch a little movie called The Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah.
Just completely fish out of water experience. I had no idea why they
What's a musical?
I had no idea why they liked this movie. I thought it was so weird. I didn't think it was funny or interesting. Just totally bizarre experience, and I just didn't get it. Like that was not the right environment for me to experience it in. So obviously as I get older, once I went to college, I revisited Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I was missing like the context of it. I didn't understand the whole audience participation element. And so that's like a whole experience that I missed out on. And so
yes, yeah.
Post becoming a fan of things like Birdemic in the Room, I kind of had more of a context for why Rocky Horror Picture Show was such a big hit. I had a greater appreciation for Tim Curry, musicals in general, which I was never a fan of. And so like getting to watch that, and similar vein, Repo the Genetic Opera, going back and revisiting those with like a right group of people who are more able to help me like understand why these movies are so charming. And by like being more open-minded, I was able to experience like just a whole like cultural experience, like being there, singing along, that sort of thing. Another example is the show The Simpsons. Now, everyone loved The Simpsons when it came out. However, kids like The Simpsons because it was a cartoon. It was a cartoon and Bart says mean things. And so that was it. And come to find out that Simpsons is one of those things that if you continue to revisit it, the older you get, Simpsons, part of why I think it's had such an enduring legacy, is one of those things that actually grows up with its audience. And as you go back, you realize that the show isn't just still good, it's actually better than you remember it. because as you get older and your sense of humor develops and you start understanding what even the jokes are.
I never watched any Simpsons, so I don't even get to have that experience.
Oh, that's so sad.
I do want to watch it, but I know I got 30 seasons to go through.
It's
someone
really like
cause another pandemic so I can watch it while killing some time.
I'm going to go against the grain a little bit and say that I think seasons, like, I think all of it's pretty good, to be honest with you. But like, first season's a little rough, but seasons 2 through, I would go so far as to say like 15 or 16 are really, really funny. Most people cut it off from like seasons like 3 to like 9 or something. With season 10 being seen as like a turning point where the show takes a nosedive, which when you consider there's over 30 seasons, a third of the way through, the idea the show just starts degrading in quality sounds terrifying. But I'd even argue that Simpsons is still entertaining and funny. Like, it's not the best show on TV or best comedy on TV anymore, but they consistently have good writers' rooms, and I think it's still as funny as. The thing is, it was at one point the funniest thing on TV, and now it's just on par with other stuff. But like Simpsons, like going back rewatching those earlier seasons, I remember enjoying as a kid when my parents weren't home, so I'd sneak off and watch Fox on bunny years because we didn't have cable. Realizing that, like, hey, like some of the episodes I enjoyed as a kid because like the kids get into shenanigans actually don't age as well as just episodes about Homer and Marge's marriage or something. And finding that the show actually is not just good, but it's great. It's a masterpiece. It's like a hallmark of American pop culture. And by going back and revisiting it and like this thing I watched as a kid and liked because it was a cartoon actually is tremendous. And so it's actually been a consistent joy in my life where I go back every once in a while and watch old Simpsons, and it just somehow keeps getting funnier. And I find more and more things I appreciate about it as time goes on.
Did you know Cinematic Doctrine has a blog? Visit cinematicdoctrine.com to read extended thoughts on movies or movie industry news from our contributors. Plus, you can find our podcast on there too.
But I think the one that's going to be the most controversial, and I can't believe I'm just throwing this at like the tail end of like an hour-long recording. But I'm finding that like my feelings towards the Star Wars prequel films continue to evolve as time goes on. Now, for context, I did not grow up watching Star Wars. Not for any particular reason. It's just that my parents weren't really science fiction fans. And neither were my grandparents. Like, they would watch science fiction films, but they weren't like big fans of it. I mostly saw like direct-to-video movies starring Dolph Lundgren or something.
That's cool. What the heck?
Yeah.
That sounds great.
So like I saw like if you ever want to see the movie Rapid Fire starring Brandon Lee and want to make an episode about it, I've seen that movie. I've seen The Peacemaker starring Dolph Lundgren, but so I did not grow up watching Star Wars, so I didn't have as much of a nostalgia for it as other people. So the first Star Wars film that had a theatrical release, I remember, was The Phantom Menace. And so seeing that, man, bright colors, there's spaceships, there's lasers, there's lightsabers.
And a funny character who farts.
I did not like Jar Jar. I never liked Jar Jar. I don't want to
Jar
Jar
Jar is the key to all this, Dan.
I don't want to say that sound like a hipster. I had no opinion on Jar Jar. Like, I just, I
also don't think as a kid, like, I cared about the Jar Jar character. I feel like
well, that's something that gets worse with age. I find that I like Jar Jar less as time goes on. Because, like, he's had this weird, ironic revival. Like, we even hinted at it a second ago. And, like, no, Jar Jar's always sucked. I don't know why people keep trying to, like...
Well, no, I'm just quoting George Lucas. He says that in one of the behind-the-scenes things where he's, trying to argue. He's like, Jar Jar's the key to all this. Like, what? You mean maybe not the Force? Maybe not midichlorians? Your own story says midichlorians are, like, the central part of the Force.
Well, it's the thing. Like, as a kid... I don't know what they're talking about when they're talking about midichlorians.
Yeah,
I don't know,
yeah.
I have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And so then I have
I just know the guy with the red and black paint is the bad guy.
And
but
he
I also
looks
know
cool
he's cool
because he's got like a double like lightsaber.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
And so as I get older, my feelings for the movie turn negative because I do go and I appreciate the older Star Wars films. And there's a lot of things to this day. Like, I think the internet in general has this weird thing where, again, doesn't know how to have like a nuanced opinions on things. So it's either like the prequels are the worst films ever made, or they're actually masterpieces, and you all need to stop like hating on them. Like the prequel,
the amount of YouTube titles that are like a deathly autopsy of and then it's like, I don't know, just a single episode of a television show you've never heard of. You're like, dude, get this 2-hour essay out of my face. Like I just hate stuff like that. It's so annoying.
I like deep dives into things that the creators think are interesting. Like if it's something they are passionate about and they like to talk about, that's great. I am less interested in, like, I don't know, the bandwagon jumping on of like, I'm going to make a 4-hour video about Star Wars because other people have made long videos about Star Wars.
Yes.
And I have, and if you don't really have anything new to add to the conversation, then like, I actually really like that recently Patrick H. Willems made a video just talking about Zack Snyder's filmography and like him as a filmmaker. And he makes a decision, like when he gets to Batman v Superman stuff, he just doesn't talk about it. He's like, there's nothing more I could add about these movies that like other people have not. So most of the video is him talking about like Zack Snyder's development as a director from Dawn of the Dead up.
But isn't it so lame that he felt the need to basically create like a padding in the beginning to tell Zack Snyder fans who probably now don't exist based on journalism, like that.
There's
don't be
a lot
babies, don't be babies. Like it's like bots, like mostly at this point. But
it's pretty large though. Like
I specifically just want to watch his the Day of the Dead remake, and that's kind of it. I think actually my wife owns it somewhere in a DVD
Dawn of the
case.
Dead?
What is that? Dawn of the Dead. Yeah. His that's why I paused the video. I didn't want to hear him talk about it because I want to watch it. But everything else by Snyder, I'm just not into that. But I digress. You're talking about Star Wars.
And so like I find that like as time went on, like I found that I had a turnaround of opinion. Like I stopped I'd only seen the Clone Wars once, and I remember Yoda does backflips. That was like all I remember about it. So I went back and rewatched them, and to this day, I don't like Attack of the Clones. Like, I don't think it's a very good movie at all. I did not like Phantom Menace, and I actually really wasn't a big fan of Revenge of the Sith at that point. But then as like more time went on, and as like the hate mobs dissipated, and I had enough time to process, Red Letter Media's multi-part video on the Phantom Menace, I found that like my opinions towards it started to soften, like as I got older, and as I just started to appreciate like Star Wars as a thing. Like, George Lucas isn't history's greatest monster. He's just a kind of eccentric guy who, at the end of the day, we should just thank him for making Star Wars. Like, he's a very bad director, I think, but he's an incredibly talented creative. He's a good editor. And I think his grasp of like story and myth is somewhat underrated. Like the fact he was able to craft this like big world. And so, my opinion started to soften, and like I never made the full jump to people who are like, oh, actually they're great. I have no idea why people don't like them at all. How could you not like these movies? And it's like, well, there's tons of problems with them. Like they're awkward. The special effects that George Lucas keeps shoving into movies just keep looking dated. He doesn't understand this quest to keep updating them will never end because special effects are constantly evolving. And so I think his movies somehow start to look worse over time in a way that's horrible and sad. And I wish he would just stop doing that. But like eventually those quirks just become part of being a Star Wars fan. And so like when I talk about Star Wars fans, I mean like long suffering nerds collected a bunch of children's toys, but they also just love Star Wars. They're not the people go around online and screaming at everyone every time something Star Wars related comes out. They're there for the ride. And so like knowing some of those people in my life has actually helped me to sort of appreciate Star Wars, or warts and all. They just enjoy it. They're like, they'll complain about George Lucas, they'll complain about the prequels, but they do it in like a good natured kind of like ribbing way where this is part of the fandom. This is part of what sort of bonds them together as friends is, they sit around, they complain about dumb stuff with Star Wars. They complain about the fact that Disney decanonized like a ton of stuff, which, I can understand would be very frustrating. They love Andor. They loved Obi-Wan. They love all the TV shows that have come out, and I think that's like part of it where like I realized like Star Wars is not something worth being upset about. It's something that like it can be a good thing that you share with your friends. Like every person I know who's passionate about Star Wars, they all have the same story of they watch Star Wars with their dad. They watch Star Wars with their parents. They made some of their first friends via Star Wars. And so for them, Star Wars isn't any particular one movie or book or whatever. It's this whole shared experience they're having. And so like when people go online and scream at each other about Star Wars, I'm like, that's not what Star Wars is about, man. Like Star Wars is also, it's funny, like all of these franchises that are built around like very fundamentally nice things, like Superman. He's like good. Like he loves humanity. He's above it, but he chooses to save it. Star Wars, you got this little green guy giving like alien proverbs, and then like somehow these things evolve into people screaming at each other online. It's like, I don't know if you're even watching the things that you claim you love so much, but Star Wars to me is, a pimply teenager talking to his like dad about like power levels and like his dad gave him his Lego set, and that guy's now giving his kids his Lego set, and like that's Star Wars to me. So those are things that over time my opinion just has shifted on, and a lot of it isn't just tied to like just thinking about movies a lot. It's, I think as you age and grow and as your perspective changes, you're just, the way that you process things and what you enjoy changes. Like the biggest thing, the thing I always think about is like, and I could have filled this list with these types of movies, like rom-coms, movies heavy on romance. I wasn't a huge fan of them when I was 7 or 8 years old. But after getting married, man, stuff just hits way different. Yep. I think part of where we get, like, I think part of the problem with online discourse is not to make any assumptions, but I think if you have copious amounts of free time to go online and complain about superheroes and science fiction, I would go so far as to assume that maybe there's other areas of your life that aren't as fulfilling. And so, maybe that's where you need to work on yourself a bit. But, as I just get more life experience under my belt, and as time goes on, I find that the things I like and do not like just naturally shift and change. And I find other things about them that I do or do not enjoy. So.
Want to keep up with various Cinematic Doctrine news? Check out our Twitter at CineDoctrine. That's CINE Doctrine. Link in the show notes. I definitely have that kind of same thing too, where like not just like movies, but the culture surrounding movies, I kind of like mature and grow past. This kind of discussion, actually, I wish you had seen the new Scream movie, because we could actually kind of riff in on that with how like that movie kind of takes the angle of like movie engagement as in the modern age, kind of like can be taken too seriously sometimes. And it's not like spoilers, it's the entirety of the Scream franchise always has that angle going on. But like, not to make this a too long episode, but just I think it's just really helpful to be willing to have like, not just like, just be willing to have breathing time to let your ideas kind of ruminate and develop. And I think you can really tell the difference between talking with someone who I think is humble to their, I would almost say, finite nature. The fact that you're not like immediately and eternally developed, like you're where you are right now is not where you will be in the future. So being able to just definitively say certain things oftentimes is not very useful. And like I've had conversations with people who like movies and watch movies a fair amount. I actually just had someone ask me at church if I talked to so-and-so about movies. And I said, yeah, but I find that when I'm talking with them, it's not really a conversation. They're just so definitive about what they think about the movies they like that they might as well just not be talking to me. Like, not because like, I don't like what I offer, say, in terms of like my experience and the way I see movies, it doesn't seem to interest them in the least. Like in other words, I'm basically saying like, they're not really interested in me. They're just interested in like the way I interpret the conversation about film is that they just are interested in what they think about film and then telling me what they think. I get that's ironic because we're talking about a podcast where we specifically put out what we think about movies for other people to hear. But part of why I say conversation is because we're developing and changing as the two of us talk. And I think, I just think that's more interesting and useful. I also think it's more palatable for community building, to just change and develop on your ideas. And I just, for this episode that I really wanted to do, and I even did all this homework of rewatching these movies, taking notes, kind of writing down other movies that I changed or developed on. I just think that's I just don't know many people who think of things this way, because I also think it's inherently something you have to be mindful about who you have been as a person and how you have developed, not to waste the potential for someone supporting for $3 a month on our Patreon. But in our episode on Nope, when we talked about movies we feel like we wish we hadn't seen, which was in theme with the whole spectacle idea of Nope, in our Patreon discussion, you specifically said, like, my answer is not all that interesting. It's really just like when I was in college, like all the boner comedies I watched that were just like worthless. Not that they were boner comedies, but it was kind of like that or adjacent. Maybe it was, but like that concept of like just movies that really have no purpose or meaning and are so cynical that it just kind of is just not just being meaningless as a movie, but meaningless in life itself, just makes it like a waste of time. Like it was just, I could have used it doing something else.
And I'll say like, those are things that like were specifically like for me in my life. I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have watched those.
Yes.
I'm
not trying to like say you can't watch boner comedies. Everybody is benefited, I think, by at least the TV edit of watching Animal House. I think it's a funny movie, but yeah, like, you were saying something.
No, just like, like that's like for me personally, those are movies that like, I was like, maybe I shouldn't have watched those. And so like, who knows, for someone else, those might be really important movies. That might be the movie that they have fond memories of hanging out in their friend's basement watching, Will Ferrell cut it up on screen, or whatever. And like, I'm not going to take those memories away from them, and like, I don't regret. Like, and I specifically was talking about ones that are really gross out raunchy comedies. Like, I don't regret seeing like Anchorman or something,
Yes, yeah. Well, some of those are great. They're funny movies.
And I think that's part of it too. Like, I think accepting that for some people, like their reactions and experiences with movies can be very personal for whatever reason. Like maybe my friend doesn't like yelling in movies because she grew up in a house with lots of yelling. I don't know. Like, that's
actually kind of the first thing I thought of when you said that, because that's usually where my mind goes. It's usually if you equate movies are experiences. I'm giving their benefit of the doubt there because like she also just like voraciously watched tons of like dramas and stuff that like had far more Gilmore Girls
screaming and yelling in them.
Gilmore Girls is yelling every episode.
So I was like, I don't know, maybe something about the way Jennifer Lawrence yelled really
I hate J-Law.
really rubbed her the wrong way. I don't know, but so like, yeah, I think part of it's for us, like, and everyone else, like when you're talking to somebody about something and their feelings and experiences about something, like, you're not, some people are able to just very objectively be like, this movie had these qualities and had these things working for it and these things didn't work for me, and that's it. But the average person, like, they're going to be drawing from their own life experiences. Like, what was the theater like? Were there lots of people crying and screaming? Were they had a horrible commute there and they rushed in just in time to catch the movie on time and they're sweating and gross? And,
everybody was loud in my theater and popcorn was everywhere. Was the movie at least good? No. And it just made it worse. Yeah. It's easy to see how like other factors, which part of that is if you better understand and interpret and filter reality, then you can separate a bad movie experience from maybe a movie being still good. I mean, I've specifically said in the podcast, I saw Smile and it was like constant talking from teens in the back. And then they would get quiet when something spooky happened. So it was almost verbatim. I mean, I don't like mentioning other shows all the time, but on Red Letter Media, when they talked about Paranormal Activity years ago, they were like, this is the weirdest experience. We basically went there and they talked. And then when something scary was seemingly about to happen, all of their phones turned off. They stopped talking to just listen, get scared and laugh, and then talked again. And it was just like strange. And yeah, that can, if you can't separate that kind of experience from like your movie, then it's hard to like, enjoy it. But that's something like I specifically was just hearing about someone trying to find a church and like they didn't like that some people were more animated and engaged during the service, but the other part, their partner specifically liked that, and that makes it hard for them to focus on, I guess, the sermon, which isn't bad. I think sometimes preference is okay for you to enjoy it, but also focusing on the sermon and whether or not the sermon is theologically accurate paired alongside the church's mission and whether or not they align is, I would say, maybe a little more important than like, did someone amen too much in the service, that kind of thing. But all that to say is thanks for making time to talk with me about changing opinions, specifically because I was like, was Halloween Ends good? Maybe. And I specifically think, I think it's a good movie. I mean, if I'm going to watch it twice in one day, then I think I'd like to think it's a good movie. But no, we won't be doing a second episode on that. Well, I guess this could be technically that, but and no, I don't think we'll do recommendations because again, wasn't intending to do one. Just enjoy your Halloween. That's my recommendation. But anything final you wanted to mention, Dan, before we sign off?
No.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode of Cinematic Doctrine. If you enjoyed this episode, consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. And as mentioned before, Cinematic Doctrine has a Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you're opted into a once-a-month movie poll where you decide a movie we discuss on the podcast. There are other unique benefits that come with supporting the podcast, so be sure to check that out at patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine. A special shout out to those who support at the Art House Theater tier on Patreon. Thank you so much, Mom, Dad, Melanie, Shirley-Ann, and Thomas. You guys are the best, and your continued monetary support is greatly appreciated. Until next time, stay cool. Want some Cinematic Doctrine swag? You're in luck. We've got 3-inch Cinematic Doctrine logo stickers exclusive for Patreon supporters. Perfect for your travel mug or laptop. Head over to patreon.com/Cinematic Doctrine, link in the show notes, and choose the independent theater tier. Doing so will net you other perks too. But let's be real, the podcast stickers are the coolest perk. So get yourself some podcast stickers by supporting on Patreon.